Many career possibilities are available to you. Why did you originally enter the field of education? Why do you want to lead others in the school?
I think initially my foray into education as a teacher with Teach for America was driven by my own experience as a student. Growing up, I attended Jefferson County Public Schools in Louisville, which until the early 2000s had one of the largest busing programs in the United States. And really from the time that I was elementary school all the way up through high school, I had the opportunity to attend schools with an economically diverse group of folks, with a racially diverse group of folks. And then as I was getting older, I saw cousins of mine who lived one county over in Oldham County, which is more of an agricultural county, and is predominantly white. And I kind of saw the way that they started to view the world, the way that, in a lot of ways, racism just kind of took a grip of who they were, and as a reflection of some of our extended family as well. I came from a pretty racist upbringing between my parents, my grandparents, and some other folks, and so the ability to be able to see that education really is an equalizer when folks have access to resources, when folks have access to high quality teachers, was something that propelled me into the classroom. And, I'm glad I made that decision. Although I was only 2 years in the classroom as a teacher, over the last 15 years, my work has evolved around the field of education in some way. And really am blessed to have that, and have seen the changes occur in a diverse group of young people. And the second part of the question was?
Why do you want to lead others in the school?
Why do I want to lead others in the school? That's a very good question. Really, at Thunder Valley, I've seen the opportunity for us to grow as an organization over the last 10 years, and we know for certain that either this year or next year we'll have a NACA-inspired fellow, Native American Community Academy inspired fellow. Most likely that school leader is going to be a Native person from around this area, and then I'd be providing them is support and help in that, in an administrative role. And I've really seen with our development, and I've seen with our Lakota Immersion child care program, young folks who go from a point of being extremely disinterested in education because it's not tied to their culture, it's not tied to place-based learning, to becoming young folks who are looking to go to school day in, day out, who are opting into summer activities because the curriculum is tied to what it is that they're interested in, what it is that it is that they know, and it sets them apart from just any old school. They have the ability to create agency in what it is that they do by being affirmed as young Lakota folks. And I just want to have the opportunity to expand that further and to be one of those leaders who helps those parents think through what education looks like for their children and what it is that they want for their future. And ultimately, I believe, too, the stronger that the education system is here on Pine Ridge, Rosebud, the surrounding area, the stronger the Native nations are here. You can't have an uneducated populace and expect to be able to move forward through the 21st, 22nd century. And I think that that's one thing that we've done well at Thunder Valley, is trying to make education a key tenet of what it is we do, and the ability to help lead a school would be pretty fantastic.
All right, question 2. You've had the opportunity to read and reflect on TFA's commitment to DEI and DEI guiding questions. What do these 2 documents make you think about or make you wonder? How do these ideas align or misalign with your experience in education so far?
Word. So I'm probably going to have to ask you to ask the second one again as I go through. And I did take some notes on this because didn't have the printout of the DEI documents, and I felt like it was better to capture what it is that I saw during the time that I was reading them through the first time. And I think back to 2004 when I was one of the 2 staff members to start Teach for America in South Dakota. And it was at a time where Institute curriculum came to you in one large binder, and there were conversations that were going on about diversity, not as much to my memory or to my knowledge at that time around equity and inclusion. And to see that an organization has these sort of documents and it's not something that is just developed and then put away, it is really helpful and really encouraging for me for the direction that Teach for America is heading and is continuing to move forward with. I think early on when I was a staff member, here we were in South Dakota, New Mexico, other areas where there were native populations. But really, if you looked at the branding, if you looked at the marketing, that was completely absent. That voice was not there. That was not tied into anything that was occurring with the way that Teach for America was telling its story nationally. I think the DEI guiding principles are good. I like the document especially with the questions that look at what are some of the barriers and opportunities that exist both at the individual level and the community level to be engaged in DEI work. And one of the things that it made me think about is I'm a social worker by training, macro social worker by training. So I have the language to be able to talk about structural racism, to be able to talk about intersectionality, a lot of these pieces that tie into the DEI work. And it made me think about how I do that on an individual level, but what are the opportunities to engage in a broader conversation across the community, whether that be, the community of Batesland, whether that be down at Thunder Valley, or whether that be a part of this rural school leadership community as well. And so I'm encouraged about that. Along the equity piece also, I like the acknowledgement of the past historical injustices. I know from living and working here, we talk oftentimes about intergenerational trauma. We talk about lateral oppression, the crabs in the bucket. And I think a lot of times folks just have this mentality of, well, folks from outside this area, why don't you pull yourself up by your bootstraps? And the reality is it's much more complex than that. And to have acknowledgement of that, I think was pretty fantastic. I was happy to see that. The one piece that I wonder about is if Teach for America's ever done sort of a internal reflection on how as an organization we'd be able to answer these questions that are presented in the materials that we were able to read over. And I think even more importantly than that is for TFA to take ownership of maybe some ways where they've unintentionally perpetuated some of the things that now are working to be addressed from a historical standpoint. Teach for America as an organization is over 20 years old, and you have to be able to have that historical knowledge, that historical memory, to be able to see what it is you need to do to grow. And so ideally, I'd love to see TFA do something along those lines and then make it public. Share it with the education community. Share it with the parents who are sending their students in to work with TFA core members every day. Because I think the more that you can hold the mirror up to your face on those sort of things, the more you're going to be able to grow as an organization. Where have I seen it play out now in the current education, or can you give me that second question again?
How do these ideas align or misalign with your experience in education so far?
So I'd say that the alignment is there from a personal belief system. As a white male, as somebody who's identifies as a social worker, as a community organizer, I try to do my best to tear down white supremacy, and I'm trying to think about that even more as I have a 8-month-old son about what that'll look like when I engage in conversations with him about race, class, sexuality, gender. Unfortunately, though, the reality that I see in a lot of the schools that I engage with is that these conversations aren't being had in the same sort of way. Is that oftentimes, too often actually, that it's really just held amongst small groups of individuals, and from a whole school-wide perspective, folks aren't necessarily bringing this sort of language, this sort of conversation into the classroom because students are aware of it. I mean, they recognize when they travel outside the boundaries of the reservation, when they spend time in other places, about the inequities that exist. We live in the least diverse county in the United States. 98% of the folks here identify as Native. And so to be able to visit with young folks about things related to race, class, gender, socioeconomic status is something I'd like to see more of.
Question 3. If I could talk to your current principal, the janitor at your school, a colleague in your department, and a student's parents or family member, and ask them to describe you in one word, what would that word be? Why do you think these people would choose those words?
Yeah. It's funny, I was just up in the Twin Cities recently for a convening of rural folks from across the United States that are interested in workforce development. And one of the folks who was there, I was one of 2 non-Native folks there, and he said, "Oh, you must be white Matt." And I never even think about it anymore because I've been living here for over 10 years. but so often one of the first things that people see is being non-native doing this work. Is I often hear from folks when they talk, they'll say, he's white, but, and then usually the ... is followed with a commitment to Native youth, a commitment to Native children. A lot of the young folks that I work with, outside of a handful of teachers that they've had over the course of the years, and typically those tend to be TFA teachers, they'll talk to me that it's in many ways the first positive experience that they've had with a white person. Because I'm not a police officer, because I don't work for DSS or Child Protective Services, and that's been their foray into meeting with white folks in so many different times. And so thinking about race, thinking about ethnicity is something I do on the regular. And I think that regardless, whoever you spoke with in my work, that would be one of the things that they'd bring up. I'd say another thing is just where we live, and once again, the amount of time I've been around here, is kinship terms that folks use for each other, whether it's brother, uncle, nephew. And I think that's reflective, one, of our workplace and the value that we place on Lakota culture and tradition, but also it's a recognition that Amhunka adopted into two families here. And when that adoption occurs and when that ceremony goes on, that's the bond of blood then at that point. And I think folks recognize that from me, from knowing that they're part of larger families. The third one I'd say is self-reflective and committed at the same time. We're in our 4th year of running our workforce development program. We continue to improve every single year, and really that's a lot of time just spent reflecting on what's working, what's not working, focusing things underneath strengths, but then also be willing to put yourself out there for young people. And sometimes it can be emotionally and physically draining. Over the course of the last 4 years, I haven't lost any young folks to suicide, which has been a huge blessing, but there have been those 3 a.m. calls, or there have been those kids, and this as an educator, who go missing for a week at a time or 2 weeks at a time, and nobody knows where they're at. And in a lot of instances, it would just be easy to give up on those young folks, to say, you've had your shot, you've had your opportunity. But my experience has been, and what I've seen as well with you at the alternative school, is that it's those young folks that need more of the focus and more of the love, and being able to talk to them about what unconditional love looks like as an educator to a young person. And so that piece really tied to commitment is a big one. And I think folks see that reflected too in the decision to build a house here, and the decision to educate my son in the school systems here, and the decision to maintain a job and a home and a family here, when there's other opportunities that present itself. And there's no shortage of folks who've come through TFA over the years who've been 2 years in deuces. And I just want young folks to know that there are people here who have that commitment for them in the long term, and working to ensure that they feel that day in, day out.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.